What if the quietest person you knew was hiding the loudest secret in global history? It sounds head-spinning, right? A chill ran down Mildred's spine, colder than the New York winter seeping through her brownstone walls. Her hand, calloused from years of maintaining this old building, trembled. She wasn't just fixing a loose baseboard. She was unearthing a secret that could plunge the world into nuclear war. Buried within the drywall, tucked away like a venomous snake, was a hollowed-out nickel. And inside that nickel, not pocket change, not a dusty relic, but a microdot smaller than a pinhead. This wasn't some B-movie plot. This was 1953, the height of the Cold War. And Mildred had just found a direct line from her quiet, unassuming tenant in Brooklyn, straight to the heart of the Kremlin. The man who paid his rent on time, the one who painted serene landscapes in his studio, he was codenamed Mark. And he was a Soviet spy. What Mildred didn't know was that this tiny coin was just the first domino in a chain reaction that would expose the deepest, darkest secrets of an international espionage ring, right here in her own home. How did a New York landlady find herself caught in a geopolitical chessboard, playing a game of life and death against one of the most dangerous intelligence agencies in the world? But before we dive deeper, if you're fascinated by the hidden battles of Cold War, also if you love your family, then subscribe, like, and comment who is the quietest person in your life. It means a lot to us. We appreciate your support. New York City in the early 1950s pulsed with a rhythm unlike anywhere else on Earth. It was a symphony of ambition, survival, and a dizzying dance of anonymity. People came here to be seen, to be heard, to make their mark, or for some, to disappear. To become just another face in the crowd, a shadow in the concrete jungle. This was the perfect camouflage. This was the ideal hunting ground for a man like Rudolf Abel. But to Mildred, the no-nonsense landlady of a brownstone on Fulton Street in Brooklyn, he was simply Mr. Martin, or sometimes Mr. Goldfish, a quiet artist, a tenant who paid his rent on time, always in cash, a man so utterly unremarkable he became remarkable. Mildred McIntire was the anchor of that brownstone. She was a woman cut from the tough fabric of post-depression New York, resilient, observant, and possessed of a finely tuned instinct for what was right and what was off. Her days were a ceaseless cycle of repairs, rent collection, and managing the delicate ecosystem of her building. She knew her tenants, knew their quirks, knew when they were struggling, when they were in love, when they were planning to skip town. But Mr. Martin, he was an enigma wrapped in an ordinary overcoat. He arrived in 1951, a man of medium height, thinning hair, and an air of quiet contemplation. He said he was an artist, a photographer, a craftsman. His studio, apartment 3B, soon became a sanctuary of silence. Mildred rarely heard him. No loud parties, no late-night arguments, no blaring radio. Just the occasional, faint click of a camera or the soft scrape of a brush against canvas. He paid his rent promptly on the first of every month, no fuss. A landlady's dream, right? That's what Mildred told herself. But a small, insistent voice in the back of her mind whispered otherwise. The first crack in Mr. Martin's perfectly constructed facade was almost imperceptible. It wasn't a dramatic discovery, but a subtle shift in the city's background noise. Mildred, like many New Yorkers, had a radio. It was a constant companion, filling the silence of her apartment with music, news, and soap operas. But Mr. Martin's radio was different. Sometimes late at night, Mildred would hear a faint, peculiar hum emanating from his apartment. Not music, not talk radio, just a low, buzzing static, persistent, rhythmic. She dismissed it at first, old building, bad wiring. But the hum had a pattern. It wasn't random interference. It was deliberate. Then there were the cameras. Mr. Martin was a photographer, yes, but the sheer quantity and variety of equipment he possessed seemed excessive, even for a professional. Boxes upon boxes of lenses, darkroom chemicals, enlargers. And the cameras themselves weren't typical snapshot cameras. They were heavy, intricate, with strange attachments and dials that Mildred didn't recognize. He was always meticulous about cleaning them, about their placement in his studio. He handled them with a reverence that felt almost religious. Mildred observed, as any good landlady does. She saw him come and go, always alone. He never received visitors. No family, no friends, no lovers. In a city where everyone seemed to be connected to someone, Mr. Martin was an island. He'd venture out with a large briefcase, sometimes returning hours later with what looked like industrial-sized canvas rolls or strange, bulky parcels wrapped in plain brown paper. He never explained. Mildred never asked. It wasn't her business, but it was unusual. The quietness of apartment 3B began to feel less like peaceful solitude and more like a carefully constructed void, a space designed to deflect attention, to repel inquiry. Mildred tried to rationalize it. Artists were eccentric. They kept strange hours. They pursued their craft with obsessive dedication. But the sheer consistency of his uneccentricity was what started to nag at her. He was too quiet, too precise, too solitary. It was a performance, a carefully choreographed absence. One afternoon, a minor plumbing issue required Mildred to enter apartment 3B while Mr. Martin was out. She had her own key, of course. She knocked, waited, then let herself in. The apartment was impeccably tidy, almost sterile. Every tool, every brush, every chemical bottle meticulously arranged. But it wasn't the tidiness that caught her eye. It was the smell. A faint, acrid odor, metallic and chemical, clung to the air. It wasn't paint or developing fluid, not entirely. It was something sharper, more industrial. Like the scent of a hidden laboratory. As she fixed the leaky faucet, her eyes scanned the room, involuntarily taking in details. On a workbench, she saw a curious collection of items, a jeweler's loupe, a set of tiny, almost microscopic tools, a small, elaborate device that looked like a cross between a radio receiver and a scientific instrument. It hummed with a low power even when seemingly inactive. She touched it almost instinctively. It was cold, precisely machined, not a painter's tool. Not a photographer's. What was it? The hum, the tools, the smell. They became the background noise to Mildred's days. She found herself listening more intently, watching more closely. The casual observations of a landlady began to morph into something more focused, more deliberate. Her intuition, honed by years of navigating city life, screamed that something was deeply wrong with Mr. Martin. He wasn't just odd, he was calculated. One crisp autumn morning, Mildred was sweeping the front stoop when Mr. Martin emerged, briefcase in hand. He paused, his gaze sweeping the street with an almost imperceptible flick of his eyes, a habit she'd noticed before. It wasn't a look of appreciation for the morning sun, but a scan. A subtle, practiced assessment of his surroundings. As he turned to descend the steps, something slipped from his coat pocket. A small, metallic object, cylindrical and about an inch long. It clattered softly on the stone. Mildred saw it, but before she could react, Mr. Martin had already stooped, snatched it up with surprising speed, and tucked it away. He offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod and continued on his way. Mildred's heart hammered. What was that? It looked like a tiny cylinder, like a miniature container. Her mind raced. She thought back to the jeweler's loupe, the microscopic tools. Could it be connected? This small, fleeting moment solidified her suspicion. Mr. Martin was hiding something significant, something he clearly did not want anyone, especially his landlady, to see. Her vigilance intensified. She started keeping a mental log. The times Mr. Martin left and returned. The rare occasions she heard his peculiar radio static. The days when she noticed a fresh, stronger chemical smell lingering after he'd been in his apartment. She tried to remain subtle, but the effort began to wear on her. The quiet man in 3B, once a source of mild curiosity, was now a growing source of anxiety. The Cold War wasn't just a distant headline for Mildred. She lived in New York. The threat of nuclear war, of Soviet infiltration, was a pervasive fear. The McCarthy era had churned up a national paranoia, a relentless hunt for communists hiding in plain sight. Mildred had dismissed it as political hysteria, but now a knot of dread formed in her stomach. Could it be? Could Mr. Martin, her quiet artist, be one of them? The thought was absurd, ludicrous. Yet it persisted. One evening, Mildred was in her own apartment directly below Mr. Martin's. She heard it again. Not the rhythmic hum this time, but a series of distinct, rapid clicks, like a telegraph, but not a loud, clattering telegraph. This was softer, almost muffled. She pressed her ear to the ceiling, trying to discern the pattern. It stopped as abruptly as it began. A few minutes later, she heard the low, familiar static hum resume. He was doing something, sending something, receiving something. The next time Mildred had a reason to enter apartment 3B, a faulty light fixture this time, she was more purposeful. She kept her eyes open, searching for anything concrete, and that's when she saw it. Tucked away on a shelf behind a stack of canvases was a hollowed-out book, a classic unassuming title carefully cut to conceal a small compartment. Her heart pounded. This wasn't the work of an artist. This was the work of someone who needed to hide things, important things. She didn't open the book. She didn't touch it. The fear of being discovered, of crossing an unspoken line, was too great. But the sight of that book, a trope of spy thrillers, made the impossible seem terrifyingly real. Mr. Martin was not just eccentric. He was a man with secrets, secrets he actively went to great lengths to conceal. The weight of this knowledge began to feel unbearable. Who could she tell? The police? What would she say? My tenant has a quiet radio and a hollowed-out book. They'd laugh her out of the station, her friends. They'd think she was imagining things, falling victim to the Cold War hysteria. She was alone with this mounting suspicion, watching a man who, by all appearances, was completely harmless. But the evidence, however circumstantial, continued to accumulate. One day she found a peculiar piece of paper in the communal trash bin outside his apartment. It was a fragment, torn unevenly, but what remained was striking. A series of numbers, written in a precise, almost mechanical hand, and alongside them a series of seemingly random letters. It looked like a code, a simple cipher perhaps, but why would an artist be scribbling coded messages? The piece of paper felt like a direct punch to her gut. It confirmed her darkest fears. Mildred didn't know much about espionage, but she knew enough from the newspapers to understand that coded messages, strange radio signals, and hidden compartments were the hallmarks of spies, of Soviet agents. And suddenly, her brownstone wasn't just a home. It was a potential nexus for danger. Her quiet tenant wasn't just Mr. Martin. He was a threat, a silent, insidious presence that could unravel lives, perhaps even nations. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that tipped her from suspicion to conviction, came in the form of a small, almost invisible detail. She was replacing a loose baseboard in the hallway outside his apartment, a legitimate repair this time. As she knelt, her eyes caught something peculiar. A tiny, almost imperceptible scratch mark on the wall, right at the joint of the baseboard. It wasn't a random mark. It looked like it had been made by something being repeatedly pried open and resealed. Carefully, with a small screwdriver, she gently leveraged the baseboard. It came away with surprising ease, revealing a small, hollow space behind it. And there, tucked deep within the darkness, not just one but several hollowed-out nickels, and inside one of them the microdot. The world went silent for Mildred. The bustling city outside, the distant sirens, the chatter of neighbors, it all faded. All that remained was the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, the thud of her own heart in her ears. She hadn't just found a peculiarity. She had found a portal. A clandestine mailbox connecting her unsuspecting brownstone to the shadowy world of international espionage. Mr. Martin wasn't just a quiet artist. He was a professional, a ghost soldier in a silent war. And she, Mildred, a New York landlady, had just stumbled upon his secret arsenal. The question wasn't if he was a spy anymore. The question was, what was she going to do now? And more terrifyingly, what else was hidden within her walls? The tiny nickel felt impossibly heavy in Mildred's hand. It was cold, smooth, and utterly unassuming. But inside, that minuscule dot held the potential to detonate a global crisis. Her mind, usually so clear and practical, reeled. The faint scratch on the baseboard, the odd hum, the hollowed-out book, the coded numbers, they weren't just oddities anymore. They were pieces of a terrifying puzzle, and she, Mildred McIntire, had just found the central piece. She was no longer just a landlady. She was an accidental witness, a reluctant participant in a game far larger and more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her initial shock. Not just for herself, but for her building, her tenants, her city. A Soviet spy. In her brownstone, what did he do? What secrets had he sent? What plans were being hatched just above her head in apartment 3B? The thought sent a tremor through her. Every interaction, every polite nod, every timely rent payment suddenly felt like a calculated lie. Mr. Martin, the quiet artist, was a master deceiver. Her first instinct was to scream, to run, to drop the coin and pretend she'd never seen it. But Mildred was built of sterner stuff. She was a New Yorker. She didn't run from a challenge. She faced it head on. But how? Who do you tell that your quiet tenant is a Cold War spy? The image of herself walking into a police station, holding up a hollow nickel, flashed in her mind. They'd think she was crazy. Another lonely old woman caught up in conspiracy theories. She needed proof, something undeniable. She carefully reinserted the microdot into the nickel, then placed the nickel back into its hidden compartment. She replaced the baseboard, making sure it looked exactly as it had before. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. She had to act, but she had to be smart about it. One wrong move and she could be in grave danger. Spies, she knew, didn't take kindly to being discovered. Mildred spent the next few days in a fog of anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards above her, every faint sound from apartment 3B made her jump. Was he watching her? Did he know she knew? Her normally bustling home felt like a trap. She tried to go about her routine, fixing a loose stair, chatting with another tenant, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the discovery, formulating a plan. She decided against the local police. This felt bigger, much bigger. It felt like something the federal government would care about. The FBI, that was it. But how do you just call the FBI and tell them you found a spy? She thought about the newspapers, the stories of brave citizens exposing traitors. But this wasn't a movie. This was her life. She made the call from a public payphone, miles from her home, just to be safe. Her voice, usually strong and clear, was tight with nerves. "I need to report something important," she began, trying to sound calm, authoritative. "I believe I have reason to suspect my tenant is a Soviet agent." There was a long pause on the other end. Then a polite, almost dismissive voice. "Ma'am, we get calls like this all the time. Can you provide any concrete evidence?" Mildred took a deep breath. This was it. "Yes, I can. I found a microdot inside a hollowed-out nickel hidden in the wall of his apartment, and I've heard strange radio signals. He has peculiar equipment." The tone on the other end changed, slightly, from dismissive to cautious. "A microdot, you say? Can you describe it?" She did, in painstaking detail. The size, the texture, the way it was folded. The agent on the phone, whose name she now knew was Agent Smith, sounded more engaged. He didn't laugh. He didn't immediately dismiss her. He told her someone would be in touch. He warned her to act naturally, to tell no one, and under no circumstances to let the tenant know she suspected anything. "Your safety could be compromised, ma'am," he said, his voice grim. Compromised. The word hung in the air, chilling her to the bone. The next few days were excruciating. She felt like an actress in a play she hadn't rehearsed, constantly aware of an unseen audience. Then 2 men in dark suits arrived. Not at her front door, but subtly, posing as utility workers. They came to her apartment first. They were polite, professional, and intensely serious. They listened to her story again, taking detailed notes. One of them, a man named Agent Owens, had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. McIntire," Agent Owens said, his voice low, "this is a very serious accusation. A microdot is indeed a classic tool of Soviet intelligence. We need to verify your claim. Can you show us the location?" She led them carefully to the hallway, explaining how she'd found the scratch, how the baseboard came away. They examined the spot. Then one of the agents, with practiced precision, carefully pried open the baseboard. There, nestled in the dark recess, were the nickels. They took one. The microdot was still inside. Mildred watched, heart hammering, as they carefully extracted it. The tiny, almost invisible speck of film held her fate, and perhaps the fate of others within its microscopic grasp. The agents didn't reveal what was on the microdot, not to her. They simply exchanged a significant glance. "You were right, Mrs. McIntire," Agent Owen said, his voice now devoid of any doubt. "This is a genuine intelligence find. You've uncovered something very important." Her relief was immense, quickly followed by a new wave of fear. "What now?" she whispered. "Now, Mrs. McIntire," Agent Owen said, his gaze unwavering, "you continue to be the best landlady Mr. Martin has ever had. You act exactly as you always have, and you become our eyes and ears." She became an unwitting informant, a silent partner to the FBI. Her brownstone was no longer just her home, it was a stakeout. Her life, once predictable, was now entangled with espionage. Surveillance equipment was discreetly installed. Agents came and went, posing as repairmen, delivery drivers, even new tenants. Mildred watched, reported, and listened. She learned the subtle cues, the coded phrases, the art of observation. She noted every movement of Mr. Martin, every visitor he didn't have, every package he received, every time his strange radio hummed. The stress began to gnaw at her. The constant vigilance, the fear that he would discover her role, the knowledge that she was living under the same roof as a man whose purpose was to undermine her country. She was scared, terribly scared, but she was also determined. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something bigger. During this period of intense covert surveillance, the FBI began to piece together the identity of Mr. Martin. His real name, they discovered, was Rudolf Abel, a high-ranking KGB intelligence officer. He was not just a lone wolf. He was the master spy, the resident of the Soviet intelligence network in the United States. He was responsible for coordinating a vast network of sleeper agents, gathering critical information on American military and atomic secrets. Mildred's quiet tenant was orchestrating a symphony of betrayal from apartment 3B. The microdot she found was just the beginning. It was a crucial piece of communication, a snapshot of Abel's operations. The FBI, with Mildred's invaluable assistance, began to uncover more hidden messages, more strange devices, more layers to Abel's sophisticated network. They found a secret radio transmitter, more hollow coins, brushes with hidden compartments, and even a coded message woven into a tapestry. Her initial observations were spot on. The hum was his shortwave radio. The tools were for espionage. The quietness was a cover. But even as the net tightened around Abel, Mildred carried a crushing secret. She was living a double life, playing the part of the oblivious landlady while secretly working to expose the man who lived upstairs. She saw him daily, exchanged polite greetings, collected his rent. Each interaction was a performance, a terrifying dance on the edge of a precipice. She wondered if he suspected anything. His eyes, always so calm, seemed to penetrate her facade sometimes. The sounds from apartment 3B intensified, morphing from struggle to methodical efficiency. Mildred stayed pressed against the ceiling, every nerve alert, trying to make sense of the chaos. She heard distinct voices now, American accents clipped and professional. Clear. One barked, "Secure the perimeter." Another commanded, these weren't random thugs, this was the FBI. Her FBI, they were here, and they were moving fast. She crept to her door, peering through the peephole. The hallway was a flurry of activity. Men in dark suits, their faces grim, moved with an almost military precision. They carried flashlights, their beams cutting through the dim hallway light, sweeping over the worn carpet and familiar wallpaper. They were armed, heavily. One agent, a burly man with a steely gaze, was positioned directly outside Mr. Martin's door, a shotgun held ready. Another was already inside. A chilling realization washed over Mildred. The frantic sounds she'd heard earlier weren't just a struggle. They were the sounds of a highly trained operative, Rudolf Abel, attempting to destroy evidence, to erase himself, in his final, desperate moments before capture. The thud was likely furniture being overturned in a frantic search for hidden compartments. The cry was the sound of a cornered man. Agent Owens, the one with the intelligent eyes, appeared in the hallway, barking orders into a small radio. His gaze swept over Mildred's door, and for a fleeting second their eyes met through the peephole. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "Stay put, Mildred, don't interfere." The message was clear. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Mildred heard the clatter of equipment, the scrape of tools, the rustle of papers being bagged. They weren't just arresting a man. They were dismantling an entire world. His world. A world built on lies and deception. She imagined the agents tearing apart apartment 3B, unearthing every hidden compartment, every coded message, every microdot, every carefully constructed illusion. Finally, the sound shifted. The methodical urgency gave way to a more subdued, controlled movement. Then she heard heavy footsteps approaching the door to 3B. A hush fell over the hallway. And then he emerged. Rudolf Abel, Mr. Martin. He was flanked by two agents, his arms cuffed behind his back. His usually immaculate clothes were disheveled, his thinning hair slightly askew, but his face. That was what struck Mildred most. It was devoid of emotion. No fear, no anger, just a profound, almost weary emptiness. His eyes, though, still held that piercing intelligence, that knowing calm. As they guided him down the stairs, his gaze flickered almost imperceptibly towards Mildred's door. Did he know? Did he suspect her role? The thought sent another shiver down her spine. The mask of Mr. Martin was gone, replaced by the stark reality of Rudolf Abel, the captured spy. He was led out of the brownstone, into the pre-dawn chill of a New York morning, and bundled into an unmarked car that sped away into the labyrinthine streets. Just like that, he was gone. The invisible man of apartment 3B had finally been seen. The house, however, was not empty. For the next several hours, a team of forensic experts, intelligence officers, and evidence technicians meticulously combed through apartment 3B. They were like archaeologists excavating a lost civilization, each artifact a clue to a deeper mystery. Mildred could hear them moving overhead, the systematic dismantling of a spy's elaborate lair. Later that morning, Agent Owens knocked softly on Mildred's door. He stepped inside, his expression serious. "Mrs. McIntire," he began, his voice low, "it's over. He's been taken into custody." Mildred felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sense of unease. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice raspy from hours of strained silence. Agent Owens nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Everything you told us and more. A shortwave radio with a complex encryption device. More hollow coins, brushes, bolts, and even a fishing rod, all with hidden compartments. Codebooks, ciphers, miniature cameras designed for microdot creation. Chemicals for developing films. It was a fully operational, state-of-the-art espionage outpost, right here above your head." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your observations, Mrs. McIntire, your courage to act on them. You uncovered the head of the entire Soviet illegal intelligence network in the United States, Rudolf Abel. This isn't just an arrest. This is a massive blow to the KGB. You've potentially saved countless American lives and secured critical national secrets." Rudolf Abel. The name alone sounded like something out of a spy novel, but the man behind the name was far more complex, far more dangerous than any fictional character. Born William Genrikhovich Fisher in 1903 in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, to Russian immigrant parents who were political activists, his early life was a crucible of diverse influences. He was a British citizen by birth, fluent in English from childhood, an invaluable asset for an intelligence operative. But Fisher's heart, and eventually his loyalty, lay with the Soviet Union. His family returned to Russia in 1921, shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. There William, or Willie, as he was sometimes known, embraced his Russian heritage and the new Soviet ideal. He was intelligent, artistically inclined, and fiercely dedicated. These qualities would become his greatest tools, both for cover and for combat. His journey into espionage began in the late 1920s when he was recruited by the OGPU, the Soviet secret police, a precursor to the KGB. His natural aptitude for languages, he spoke at least 6 fluently. His technical skills, he was a gifted radio operator and engineer, and his photographic memory made him a natural. He wasn't just trained in tradecraft, he was bred for it. He learned codes and ciphers, dead drops and brush passes, surveillance and counter-surveillance. He was taught to become a ghost, to blend into any environment, to adopt any persona. His first major assignment came in the 1930s, operating illegally in Europe, establishing clandestine networks. He was a master of improvisation, capable of thinking on his feet, adapting to unforeseen circumstances with chilling calm. This period honed his skills, transforming the young idealist into a seasoned operative. But then the Great Purge under Stalin swept through the Soviet intelligence services, and Fisher, fearing for his life, was temporarily sidelined, forced to work as a translator and radio engineer. He survived the purges, a testament to his cunning and resilience, only to re-emerge stronger and more committed after World War II. By the late 1940s, the Cold War was escalating, and the Soviet Union needed its best agents on the frontline. America. This is where William Fisher truly became Rudolf Abel. He adopted the identity of an old friend, a fellow intelligence officer who had died, a common KGB practice to create untraceable legends. With a meticulously crafted backstory, a new name, and a mission of unparalleled importance, Abel was dispatched to the United States. His objective: to establish and run the most critical Soviet espionage network dedicated to stealing atomic and military secrets from the heart of American power. He entered the U.S. illegally in 1948, crossing the Canadian border. His persona as an artist, a painter, and a photographer was not a random choice. It was brilliant. It provided a plausible reason for his erratic hours, his extensive technical equipment, his need for a quiet studio, and his solitary existence. Who questions an eccentric artist? No one. He was perfectly designed to be overlooked, a master of blandness in a bustling metropolis. Mildred's observations, though she didn't know it then, were chillingly accurate. The peculiar radio hum was his shortwave radio, used for sending and receiving encrypted messages to Moscow. The excessive camera equipment included miniature cameras for microdot photography and specialized developing apparatus. The jeweler's loupe and tiny tools were for crafting the very hollowed-out nickels and other concealment devices Mildred found. His intense focus, his quiet precision, his utter self-sufficiency, these weren't quirks. They were the honed attributes of a world-class spy. He was a man of immense discipline. Every morning he would perform a series of exercises, then sit down to meticulously transcribe encrypted messages received overnight. He would then, with incredible artistry, create microdots, often hiding them in the most mundane of objects, coins, bolts, even seemingly innocuous pieces of jewelry. He'd then arrange dead drops, leaving these tiny packets of stolen information in predetermined locations across the city to be picked up by his couriers. His emotional detachment was legendary. He formed no real attachments, made no close friends. Even when his network faced setbacks, or when his subagents ran into trouble, Abel remained stoic, focused on the mission. He was a professional, a machine of espionage. His art, his painting, wasn't just a cover. It was also a release, a small window into the man who existed beneath the layers of deception. But even that was controlled. His landscapes were serene, often melancholic, revealing nothing of the storm raging within or the dangerous operations he orchestrated. For nearly a decade, Rudolf Abel operated with impunity, a ghost living among millions, directing a crucial arm of Soviet intelligence. He was a testament to the effectiveness of deeply embedded illegals, agents operating without diplomatic cover, relying solely on their fabricated identities and masterful tradecraft. He was literally a phantom, pulling strings in the shadows, stealing secrets that could determine the balance of power between two nuclear superpowers. The moment Rudolf Abel was led away from the brownstone, the real work for the FBI truly began. His capture wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The meticulous forensic sweep of apartment 3B was just the first phase of unraveling a spiderweb that stretched across the United States and directly into the heart of the Kremlin. Mildred's discovery of that microdot wasn't just proof of one spy. It was the key that unlocked an entire clandestine network. The FBI agents, led by Agent Owens and his team, methodically dismantled Abel's lair. Every item, no matter how insignificant it seemed, was scrutinized. They found the shortwave radio, perfectly tuned to specific frequencies, with a one-time pad system for encrypting messages, a nearly unbreakable code if the pads were never reused. They discovered more hollow coins, like the one Mildred found, along with hollow pencils, cufflinks, and even hollowed-out camera batteries, all designed to conceal microdots. Abel had been a prolific and ingenious craftsman of deception. The sheer volume and sophistication of the equipment were staggering. Miniature cameras, capable of photographing entire documents onto a film chip smaller than a pinhead. Chemical compounds for creating and developing these microdots. Tools for finely carving and sealing the concealment devices. It was a complete espionage workshop, operating quietly and efficiently under Mildred's very nose. But the most damning evidence lay within the documents and code materials. The FBI found notebooks filled with coded messages, meticulously logged and organized. These weren't random jottings, they were communications, and they revealed the true scope of Abel's operations. He wasn't just collecting intelligence himself. He was a resident, a station chief, managing a network of other illegals and recruited agents. Through the deciphered messages, the FBI began to identify other operatives. One crucial lead emerged from a decrypted message hinting at a specific dead drop location. Following this lead, agents eventually located more microdots and, crucially, contact information for other members of Abel's network. This included co-conspirators like Reino Heihennen, a Finnish-American operative who had actually been Abel's courier and assistant. Heihennen, a far less disciplined and more reckless agent, was ultimately the weakest link. He had been recalled to Moscow due to his alcoholism and increasingly erratic behavior. Fearing punishment, Heihennen defected to the Americans, walking into the U.S. Embassy in Paris and spilling the entire story of his and Abel's operations. He identified Abel as his superior, described their communication methods, and even detailed the dead drops and concealment techniques. This defection, which happened before Mildred's crucial discovery of the microdot, played a critical role. Heihennen's testimony provided the FBI with crucial intelligence, but it was Mildred's physical discovery of the microdot in the brownstone, the concrete evidence, that directly linked Abel to the network and provided the unassailable proof needed for an arrest and conviction. Heihennen's defection gave them the who and how. Mildred's find gave them the where and what. The two events, separated by thousands of miles and different motivations, converged to seal Abel's fate. The information flowing from apartment 3B detailed highly sensitive intelligence targets. Abel's network was actively seeking information on American nuclear submarine programs, missile technology, and advanced radar systems. The microdots often contained photographs of classified documents, maps of military installations, and reports on scientific advancements. This wasn't just general snooping. It was a focused, strategic attack on America's most vital defense secrets. The unraveling of Abel's network revealed the chilling reality of Soviet espionage. Its patience, its reach, its technological sophistication, and its ruthlessness. These weren't bumbling amateurs. They were highly trained professionals, operating with vast resources and a singular objective: to gain every advantage over the United States in the escalating Cold War. As the FBI pieced together the fragments of Abel's operation, the picture became clearer. Mildred's quiet tenant was at the nexus of a clandestine war being waged on American soil. His arrest wasn't just the capture of one man. It led to the dismantling of a significant portion of the KGB's illegal intelligence apparatus in the U.S. It exposed vulnerabilities, revealed methods, and sent a clear message to Moscow. Their operations were not invisible. The impact stretched far beyond Brooklyn. The exposure of Abel and his network provided invaluable insights into Soviet tradecraft, allowing American counterintelligence to refine its own methods. It became a textbook case in how to identify, track, and neutralize deeply embedded illegal agents. The arrest of Rudolf Abel sent shockwaves through America. Here, in the heart of Brooklyn, a master spy had operated for years, undisturbed, stealing secrets that could determine the fate of the free world. The FBI, keen to demonstrate its vigilance and the seriousness of the threat, moved quickly. The charges against Abel were grave: conspiring to transmit defense information to the Soviet Union, conspiring to obtain defense information, and acting as an unregistered foreign agent. The stakes couldn't have been higher, but how do you prosecute a ghost? A man so skilled in deception that he had erased his own identity. The government needed a strong case, not just for conviction, but to send a clear message. America would not tolerate foreign espionage on its soil. And to do that, they needed an unimpeachable legal defense, even for a known enemy. Enter James B. Donovan, a distinguished Brooklyn lawyer. Donovan was no stranger to high-stakes cases. He had served in the OSS during World War II, America's wartime intelligence agency, and had a keen understanding of global power dynamics. Initially approached to assist with the appeals process, Donovan was soon appointed by the court to represent Abel. It was a thankless, controversial job. In the midst of rabid anti-communist sentiment, defending a Soviet spy was akin to treason in the eyes of many. Donovan, however, believed fiercely in the American legal system, in the right to a fair trial for everyone, even the most despised enemy. The trial began in October 1957. The evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming. Agent Owens, who had meticulously investigated Abel, presented the physical evidence Mildred McIntire had helped uncover: the microdots, the hollowed-out coins, the hidden radio, the coded messages. Each piece was a devastating blow to Abel's pretense of being a simple artist. Reino Hayhenen, the defector and Abel's former subordinate, delivered explosive testimony, detailing their operations, the communication methods, and the targets of their espionage. His words painted a vivid, chilling picture of a sophisticated, well-oiled spy machine. But Abel remained a sphinx. Throughout the entire trial, he maintained a remarkable composure. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was calm, almost academic. He never denied being a Soviet citizen or working for his government, but he steadfastly refused to reveal any details that could compromise his country or his fellow agents. He saw himself as a soldier, captured behind enemy lines, bound by a code of silence. His stoicism was both unnerving and, even to some of his opponents, grudgingly admirable. He was a professional to the core. Donovan, for his part, mounted a vigorous defense, focusing not on Abel's innocence. That was almost impossible given the evidence, but on the legal intricacies of the case. He argued for due process, challenged the legality of some of the evidence collection, and highlighted the importance of upholding American legal principles even for an enemy combatant. His defense was less about setting Abel free and more about ensuring that the American justice system, in its moment of triumph, did not descend into the tactics of its authoritarian adversaries. He also argued a strategic point that would prove prophetic: that Abel, as a valuable intelligence asset, might be useful to the United States in the future for an exchange with an American captive. This was a bold and controversial suggestion at a time when the public demanded retribution, not negotiation, for a Soviet spy. The public reaction to the trial was a microcosm of Cold War America. Newspapers screamed headlines of "Red Spy," and public opinion was overwhelmingly hostile. People struggled to reconcile the image of a quiet, respectable neighbor with that of a cunning agent of a hostile foreign power. Mildred McIntire found herself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight, her quiet courage lauded by some, but also subjected to intense scrutiny and even threats from those who believed she was a pawn in a larger, sinister game. She became a symbol of civilian vigilance, but the experience left her deeply shaken, longing for the anonymity she had lost. On October 25, 1957, the jury returned its verdict. Rudolf Abel was found guilty on all 3 counts. The courtroom, packed with reporters and onlookers, erupted in murmurs. For many, it was a vindication, proof that the system worked, that the enemy could be caught and punished. But the final act of the drama was yet to play out: the sentencing. Donovan, still arguing for his controversial exchange theory, pleaded with the judge not to impose the maximum sentence, citing the potential future value of Abel. The judge, swayed by the gravity of the crimes but perhaps also by Donovan's foresight, sentenced Abel to 30 years in prison for espionage, 10 years for conspiracy, and 5 years for failing to register as a foreign agent, with the sentences running concurrently. It was a harsh sentence, but not the death penalty that many had demanded. Abel, true to form, showed no emotion. He simply rose, nodded to Donovan, and was led away. Life behind bars was a stark contrast to the clandestine world Rudolf Abel had inhabited. He was initially sent to a federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia. Far from the bustling streets of New York, he was now confined within cold, stone walls, his movements dictated by guards, his days structured by the monotonous rhythm of prison life. Yet, even in captivity, Abel remained an enigma. He adapted with characteristic stoicism. He continued to paint, finding solace and a semblance of purpose in his art. His landscapes, once a cover, now became a genuine outlet, a way to maintain his inner world in the face of his outer confinement. He also read extensively, studied languages, and remained meticulously disciplined. He never complained, never spoke ill of his captors, and never expressed regret for his actions. He was a professional to the very end, viewing his imprisonment as a consequence of his profession, a risk he had always understood. For the American intelligence community, Abel's capture was a goldmine. While he himself refused to cooperate, the mountains of evidence uncovered from apartment 3B, combined with Hayhenen's testimony, provided unprecedented insights into KGB operations. This allowed the FBI and CIA to identify other Soviet agents, unravel communication channels, and strengthen their counterintelligence efforts. The quiet landlady's discovery had yielded intelligence that would pay dividends for years to come. But the Cold War was a dynamic, brutal game, and captures weren't a one-sided affair. While America celebrated Abel's arrest, the Soviet Union was also actively engaged in its own espionage operations, and sometimes they caught an American. The most prominent example, and the one that would dramatically alter Abel's fate, was the U-2 incident. On May 1, 1960, Francis Gary Powers, an American pilot, was shot down while flying a U-2 spy plane deep within Soviet airspace. Powers was captured alive. The U-2 incident was a diplomatic disaster for the United States, exposing high-altitude reconnaissance flights over Soviet territory that the U.S. had previously denied. Powers became a potent propaganda tool for the Soviets, a living symbol of American aggression. Suddenly, the strategic foresight of James B. Donovan during Abel's trial took on a new, urgent significance. Here was a valuable American asset, a pilot caught in the act of espionage, now languishing in a Soviet prison. The idea of a spy swap began to gain traction. The trade of high-value captured agents was a brutal, pragmatic reality of the Cold War. It wasn't about justice or morality. It was about national interest, about getting your own people back. The Soviet Union, for its part, quickly signaled its interest in such an exchange. For them, Abel was not just a captured spy. He was a highly respected officer, a hero of the Soviet Union in their eyes, whose knowledge and experience were invaluable. His release was a priority. The stage was set for a dangerous, delicate negotiation. On one side, the United States held Rudolf Abel, a Soviet master spy. On the other, the Soviet Union held Francis Gary Powers, the American U-2 pilot, along with another American, Frederick Pryor, a student accused of espionage. The human cost of these secret wars was now laid bare. Individuals, some dedicated agents, some unwitting pawns caught in the crossfire of superpower rivalry. James B. Donovan, the lawyer who had so controversially defended Abel, was now tasked with an even more challenging role, negotiating his release. He was chosen precisely because of his unique relationship with Abel, his legal expertise, and his understanding of both sides of the Cold War divide. It was a mission shrouded in the deepest secrecy, a shadow dance between two sworn enemies. Donovan traveled to East Berlin, a city cleaved in two by the ideological chasm of the Cold War, a place where tensions were palpable and danger lurked around every corner. His primary contacts were not official diplomats but shadowy intermediaries, East German lawyers and KGB representatives, each playing their part in the elaborate charade of deniability. The negotiations were painstaking, fraught with mistrust, and riddled with false starts. Every word, every gesture was scrutinized. The Soviets, always adept at propaganda, tried to leverage their position, demanding more, attempting to humiliate the Americans. Donovan, however, was tenacious. He understood the nuances of the game. He knew that both sides wanted their men back. He focused on the pragmatism of the exchange, emphasizing the mutual benefit. He tirelessly worked to ensure that Frederick Pryor, the American student caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, was also included in the deal, demonstrating America's commitment to all its citizens. The date was February 10, 1962. The location, the Glienicke Bridge, connecting West Berlin to Potsdam in East Germany. A desolate, forbidding structure that for years had stood as a stark symbol of the divided world. On this cold, overcast morning, it would become known as the Bridge of Spies. The air was thick with tension, palpable even in the grainy black and white photographs that would later capture the moment. Both sides were on high alert, heavily armed and deeply suspicious. The stakes were astronomical. A failed exchange could have catastrophic consequences, not just for the prisoners, but for the already strained relations between the superpowers. James B. Donovan stood on the western side of the bridge, bundled against the biting wind, his heart a drum against his ribs. Beside him, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, was Rudolf Abel. The man Mildred McIntire had known as Mr. Martin was now a central figure in a global drama. He looked older, perhaps a little thinner, but his composure remained unshaken. He stood with quiet dignity, gazing across the bridge. On the eastern side, another figure emerged from the shadows, Francis Gary Powers, the U-2 pilot, flanked by his Soviet captors. With him was Frederick Pryor, the American student. Powers appeared pale, gaunt, his face etched with the strain of nearly 2 years in a Soviet prison. The contrast between the stoic, almost serene Abel and the visibly anxious Powers was stark. The exchange was orchestrated with a precision that bordered on the theatrical. Each side had to be sure their asset was present and unharmed before committing to the release. The process involved multiple checks, last-minute demands, and moments where the entire deal seemed on the verge of collapse. Donovan, acting as the sole, brave intermediary, moved between the two sides, relaying messages, offering assurances, and navigating the treacherous currents of distrust. The moment finally arrived. As if on cue, a signal was given. Abel began his slow, deliberate walk across the bridge from west to east. Simultaneously, Powers and Pryor began their walk from east to west. They passed each other in the middle, two men whose lives had become inextricably linked by the cruel logic of the Cold War. There were no words exchanged, no lingering glances, just a silent, somber passage. The wind whipped around them, carrying the weight of their respective burdens. Abel reached the eastern side, where he was greeted by Soviet officials with quiet reverence. Powers and Pryor reached the western side, met by American intelligence officers, and for Powers, the bittersweet relief of freedom after years of captivity. The mission was a success. Donovan had pulled off the impossible. He had secured the release of 2 Americans, and in doing so, had etched himself into the annals of Cold War history. News of the exchange reverberated around the world. It was a rare moment of direct, if tense, cooperation between the 2 ideological enemies, a testament to the pragmatic realities that sometimes trumped the fierce rhetoric of the Cold War. For the American public, it brought a sense of relief and pride, showcasing the value placed on American lives, even at the cost of releasing a notorious spy. The Glenick Bridge exchange wasn't just a dramatic Cold War footnote. It was a profound illustration of the intricate, often morally ambiguous, nature of international espionage. For Rudolf Abel, the trade meant a return to his homeland, the Soviet Union. He was greeted as a hero, a loyal officer who had endured captivity with unwavering resolve. He was reinstated into the KGB, albeit in a training and advisory role, using his vast experience to teach future generations of spies. He died a celebrated, decorated man in 1971, never betraying his principles or his country. His quiet stoicism to the end became the stuff of legend within Soviet intelligence circles. Francis Gary Powers returned to a complicated reality. While hailed as a hero for enduring captivity, he also faced scrutiny and suspicion from some corners of the U.S. government regarding his actions after being shot down. He eventually wrote a book about his experience and continued to work in aviation, including as a helicopter pilot for news stations. He died in 1977, his life forever marked by that fateful U-2 flight and his walk across the Bridge of Spies. Frederick Pryor, the student unexpectedly caught in the spy net, went on to have a distinguished academic career, eventually becoming an economics professor. His inclusion in the exchange, largely due to Donovan's persistence, highlighted the humanitarian aspect that sometimes pierced through the geopolitical coldness. And James B. Donovan. He became a national hero, his courageous defense of Abel and his skillful negotiation lauded. He continued his work as a lawyer, taking on other complex international cases, including negotiating the release of Cuban prisoners after the Bay of Pigs invasion. His life was a testament to the power of principle and the effectiveness of quiet, determined diplomacy. But what about Mildred McIntire, the landlady whose initial, humble discovery set this entire saga in motion? She faded back into the quiet rhythms of her Brooklyn life. She never sought fame, never capitalized on her unique experience. The brownstone on Fulton Street remained her home, though it carried a different kind of history now. She lived out her days as she always had, a diligent landlady, a keen observer, a woman of quiet strength. Her heroism was not in grand gestures, but in her unwavering commitment to doing what she believed was right, even when it meant personal danger and immense stress. She proved that even the ordinary individual, armed with nothing but sharp wits and courage, could play a pivotal role in events of global consequence. The story of Rudolf Abel, the quiet artist, and Mildred McIntire, the vigilant landlady, serves as a powerful reminder of several enduring truths. First, that the invisible war of espionage is fought not just in dark alleys and foreign capitals, but in the most mundane of places like a Brooklyn brownstone. Second, that the most dangerous enemies are often those who blend in seamlessly, their ordinariness being their greatest camouflage. And finally, that courage comes in many forms, sometimes in the quiet observations of a New York landlady, sometimes in the principled defense of a hated enemy, and sometimes in the lonely walk across a windswept bridge. The curtain had fallen on the immediate drama of Rudolf Abel's capture and exchange, but the echoes of his story, and Mildred McIntire's pivotal role, resonated far beyond the 1960s. The Bridge of Spies became a symbol not just of a spy swap, but of the Cold War's bizarre, brutal pragmatism, where human lives were pawns in a global chess match. Yet, the unseen legacy of this event, particularly for those whose names rarely made the headlines, ran much deeper. For Mildred McIntire, the post-Abel era was a return to normalcy, but a normalcy forever tinged with an extraordinary past. She never again achieved the sweet, unquestioning anonymity she'd once enjoyed. Her brownstone became a point of historical curiosity, occasionally drawing journalists or history buffs who wanted to see the place where the colonel had lived. She tolerated the attention with a mixture of weariness and quiet pride, always deflecting praise, always emphasizing that she had simply done her duty. Her interactions with people, however, subtly shifted. There was a new, almost imperceptible sharpness to her gaze. She was still the diligent landlady, collecting rents and fixing leaks, but her observations were now layered with an understanding of human deceit that few ever acquire. She saw the world through a new lens, one that recognized the possibility of vast, hidden depths beneath the most ordinary surfaces. She learned to trust her instincts even more, understanding that sometimes the off feeling in her gut was a warning sign, not just a fleeting unease. She became a silent guardian of her community, a quiet sentry against the unseen. Her story became a testament to the power of citizen vigilance, a powerful counter-narrative to the idea that only trained professionals could detect such sophisticated threats. She wasn't just a witness. She was an active participant, an ordinary woman thrust into an extraordinary moment, and she met it with unwavering courage. The Abel case profoundly impacted American counterintelligence. It was a stark wake-up call, demonstrating the sheer sophistication and patience of Soviet illegal operations. The FBI poured resources into understanding and identifying deeply embedded agents. Abel's methods, his tradecraft, the minutiae of his communication, all became textbook examples in counterespionage training. The hollowed-out coins, the microdots, the dead drops, these were no longer just theoretical concepts from spy novels, but proven, effective tools used by a formidable adversary right on American soil. The case forced intelligence agencies to reassess their assumptions about who a spy could be, cementing the understanding that the most dangerous agents were often those who seemed the most unremarkable. It changed how they looked at artists, photographers, even seemingly harmless hobbyists, reminding them that anyone, anywhere, could be a conduit for secrets. Beyond the immediate tactical lessons, the Abel saga left a lasting mark on the public consciousness. It brought the abstract threat of the Cold War into concrete, tangible reality. For many Americans, it was the first time they truly understood that the enemy wasn't just across an ocean. He could be living in the apartment upstairs, painting landscapes, and paying his rent on time. Fueled both a healthy skepticism and, at times, a pervasive paranoia. The story contributed to the national narrative of eternal vigilance, fostering a distrust of the other that, while understandable in the context of the Cold War, also had its own complex and sometimes problematic social consequences. The personal cost, too, was an unseen legacy. For Abel, despite his hero's welcome, life in the USSR after capture and exchange was not without its own silent struggles. The years of isolation, the pressure of his mission, and the psychological burden of living a fabricated life must have left indelible scars. For Francis Gary Powers, the trauma of capture, the public scrutiny, and the often unjust suspicion he faced upon his return haunted him for the rest of his life. These individuals, whether spy or captured pilot, were irrevocably shaped by their experiences, becoming living monuments to the unforgiving nature of a war fought in the shadows. In our contemporary world, where information is currency and anonymity is increasingly elusive, the story of Rudolf Abel and Mildred McIntire remains strikingly relevant. We live in an era of complex cyber warfare, global disinformation campaigns, and the persistent threat of foreign influence. While the tools and methods of espionage have evolved dramatically, the fundamental principles of intelligence gathering and counterintelligence remain rooted in human observation, vigilance, and the detection of anomalies. The quiet tenant of today might not be hiding microdots in nickels, but perhaps encrypted data on a hard drive, or manipulating social media feeds from a seemingly innocuous online profile. Mildred McIntire's quiet courage serves as an enduring reminder that the defense of a nation is not solely the purview of generals and intelligence agencies. It resides, in part, in the collective awareness of its citizens. Her story underscores the fact that vigilance isn't just about looking for overt threats, but about paying attention to the subtle disharmonies, the calculated absences, the meticulously crafted ordinary lives that might, in fact, be masks for something far more profound. The Glenick Bridge may now be a quiet, historical landmark, but the bridge of human perception, the gap between what we see and what truly is, remains a constant challenge. Mildred McIntire, the New York landlady, built her own bridge across that gap, showing us that sometimes the most powerful acts of patriotism aren't made with flags or speeches, but with a keen eye, a courageous heart, and the quiet determination to unearth a hidden truth. Her legacy is a quiet call to arms, urging us to never underestimate the power of careful observation and to always question what lies beneath the surface, even in the most seemingly unremarkable of lives. Rudolf Abel's story is just one of many chilling tales from the covert battlefields of the Cold War. His capture and exchange became a template for future spy swaps, but the real heroes were often the unacknowledged ones, like Mildred. If you're fascinated by the hidden figures and secret battles that shaped our world, you won't want to miss our next deep dive. And don't forget to hype the video and comment your favorite part of the story.